Hey everyone, welcome to Arc 5, Part 2, The Book of Elements. I apologize for having taken so long to do this one. I got a little distracted by a little game called Tears of the Kingdom. So this arc is the longest so far that we've read because it contains 4 of the books. So we're going to jump right in and begin with the remainder of the plot of Arc 5 and then finish off with what's happening with the individual characters. I'll give my final thoughts at the end. The very same night that Matt is sucked into the book, the group, including Arube, meet at the bookshop. Will stands with a look of shock. Arube asks Cedric to explain what had happened. He frantically explains that Matt had been swallowed by the book, and he knows it sounds hard to believe. Irma interrupts Cedric, saying he's always been a liar. Arube tells Irma to keep calm and let him speak. When Cedric thanks her, saying he knows he could count on her, she then snaps at him for saying this, and that he needs to further explain himself. The girls glare at him as he explains that as Jonathan Ludmore wrote down his elemental research, the book became a sentient creature. Will gently touches the book, looking worried. In the next instant, she blasts Cedric, calling him a liar. This horrific scene continues on for quite a bit, the others pleading for her to stop. Arube holds Cornelia back, amazed at the power Will is displaying without even transforming, that the power of the heart seems out of control. In Kandrakar, Hay Lin expresses concern. The oracle says this is a strong display of hate and love, so strong that dark clouds swarm Kandrakar. He tells her not to worry, that Hay Lin is about to help. Hay Lin reminds Will that she can now detect lies, and that Cedric isn't lying right now, and that she should stop attacking for Matt's sake. Will looks pained and says she is doing this for Matt's sake. Taranee steps in, making the point that Cedric is the only one who can communicate with the book. He's told them it speaks in the Meridian dialect. It would only take mortals that try to open it, being Matt. Cornelia encourages Will to listen. Irma makes a joke that Matt has become a bookmark, and someone, possibly Cornelia, adds that Cedric may be the only access they have to Matt. Will finally halts her attack, and Cedric hits the ground. When Irma steps forward, Will recoils and advises Irma to stay back. Will grills Cedric, more than she already has, aggressively asking him to keep talking. Mainly, why isn't Cedric also in the book? Cedric suggests that the book needs him, or because he isn't mortal, stressing that just because he's powerless doesn't mean he's immortal. Will interrupts him and cries as she essentially tells him to shut up and that he needs to think, and leaves the shop. Cornelia follows her, saying she understands. Remember, she essentially became a villain when she tried to revive Caleb in Arc 2. Will clarifies that she doesn't know what came over her and that she almost, let's say, annihilated him. Cornelia tries to comfort her by blaming their malfunctioning powers because of the challenge of the elements. Will interrupts her, saying that isn't a viable excuse. Cornelia then says that nobody can blame her for her reaction. Cedric kept the book a secret, and Will disagrees. Cedric only had the book to try and escape, not knowing his need for revenge, mind you. Will then adds that she felt a surge of anger that she didn't even try to control it in that moment. As the girls leave, they justify Will's behavior, saying Cedric deserved it. Taranee puts the whole group at fault for not being alert, and I agree with her. Though I say Will is most guilty of this, as you can see, she is very distracted in part 1, even ignoring Irma's concerns about her visions and Ludmore, and not caring when Arube called her out for not knowing Heatherfield's history, even though she kept questioning why Heatherfield is important. She didn't put in the work. It's Cornelia to suggest seeking counsel from Kandrakar. Will says she can feel Matt's presence still, and that the heart said Matt is alive. Cedric watches from inside the shop, mentally patting himself on the back, and Arube notices him looming. He is alone, before Arube suddenly appears, pointing out his smug look. He tries to explain, and Arube says he wasn't smart, he was only lucky. She threatens him, saying that while the others will go home and get in trouble, Arube has no one to answer for, and that she'll be staying there all night waiting to hear the book speak, needing to know if he's telling the truth. He offers to make coffee, and when she refuses, Cedric says that he thought she trusted him. She hoped that he had changed, and she feels used. She watches him in the book all night. All the while, Cedric wonders how to regain Arube's trust. As the group splits to head home, Irma remembers her visions and how no one listened to her. Hay Lin, Taranee, and Cornelia spend time wondering how they would deal with such a situation if their guys were taken. As for Will, she looks utterly defeated, passing Susan's wrath as she was out very late that night, and she crawls into bed and thinks of Matt. She even remembers the kiss between Dee and Matt. I couldn't remember if they absorbed the astral drop memories or not, so that part is a little strange to me. We cut back to Kandrakar. A depressed and obscured Will appears on a transmuting card. The Oracle muses that she is one of the most feared creatures in the universe, but now appears as a scared child. The clouds around Kandrakar have lightened, and the Oracle says that they may actually darken again, meaning this darkness is not over with yet. Hay Lin asks what will cause this, and he only says that while he now shares counsel with Hay Lin and Indarno, he is still the only one with certain knowledges. The Oracle says that this is the first time the elements have challenged the Guardians in this way. And it's all very cryptic, but once again, the girls are supposed to prove themselves as the chosen ones. He sends Hay Lin to soothe Will's dreams. She gently touches Will's head, but says that she'll still have a rough night. Meanwhile, we finally see Matt. He senses Will's presence, and he wanders a wispy blue void. He feels as though he's being watched. This frustrates him, and he shouts. He realizes yelling is useless and sits down, and feels suspended in time. He remembers what Cedric did. He starts to become anxious about how long he's been in there, and lays down to sleep, thinking of Will. The next morning, things get difficult. Peter is already asking Taranee if she knows where Matt is. He was with Will, after all. Taranee's at a loss for words and says maybe he'll turn up eventually. She knows Peter won't give up. The next day, the eye on the book watches intently as the girls transform before heading to Kandrakar. Arube gets dizzy as she's had little sleep the night before. Cedric asks if she's okay, a worried look on his face. Arube shrugs him away. She notices that Cedric had no trouble sleeping. She also notices the eye on the book and felt it has been watching them. When the girls arrive in Kandrakar, they appear in the Chamber of Spirits. Indarno meets them. They want the Oracle, but Indarno says he is busy. Irma looks concerned. Indarno reaffirms he can speak with them instead, as one of the new leaders. Will folds her arms and huffs that this is all ridiculous and she only cares about Matt. Indarno is floored by this behavior. Irma jokes that he better watch himself, and Indarno tells her to be respectful. Will gets angry and rumbling clouds gather. She demands answers. Indarno then utilizes a copy of an object called the Orb of Lagadath. It shows them Matt, and that tells them that he is truly alive. Irma seems annoyed that once again they are given answers through smoke and mirrors. The orb seems to malfunction, releasing clouds and images of the elemental symbols, and images of strange creatures form in the clouds. Indarno is not yet able to understand what they were just shown. He gives the excuse that the sphere of Lagadath is as old as Kandrakar, and the original copy was lost. Because, remember, this room is full of copies of things, and because this is a shadow of the original, it provides incomplete information, according to Indarno. Somehow, in all of that smoke, Indarno was able to determine that freeing Matt will be difficult, and that he's not alone, and that they will need to unlock the book one by one. That the creature in the book will contact them. Again, that's a lot of information from this. Will asks what those monster-like cloud forms were. Indarno interprets these to represent the protectors the elements summoned to protect themselves, after Ludmore tried to rein them in. Indarno confirms that they will need to come face to face with the elements. He brings forth a golden cylinder, saying it contains an object they know well. Something that was destroyed, but then regenerated here in the Chamber of Spirits. And then he just leaves, saying he's only acting as messenger for the elements. A little bit fed up, Will calls the heart to send them home. They become beams of light and are then scattered across Heatherfield. Irma to Heatherfield Bay, Taranee to a spa called Warm Water, Cornelia to some bushes where she unwittingly swears in front of some scouts, Hay Lin to the tallest building in Heatherfield. She sneaks away when a worker goes for help. and Will ends up in line for City Hall. The people of Heatherfield must have a lot to do at City Hall because the line looks like a premiere of a movie or a new technology, and some people in line fight over whether or not she was in line before. Before the girls left Kandrakar, we saw Cedric and Arube chatting. She caught Cedric having a smug inner monologue in front of the book. She doesn't know what he's thinking, but she calls him out on acting strange. She expresses that she can't wait to go home once this is all over, and Cedric is surprised. She thinks this will go by quickly. She says, hopefully it will, because Will was terrifying the night before. Cedric teases that she was worried about him, and then she pokes the book's eye, which seems to cause an earthquake of some kind, roughly the same time that they tried to come home. When the girls meet up at the shop after trekking from their strange destinations, there is now a large crack in the wall. Cornelia reminds Will about the item they received from Indarno. Will pulls out some paper and questioningly says, "A map?" Cornelia is the only one to recognize it as the map of the 12 portals. Suddenly, the map glows and grows to fit the stone wall behind the book. The chapter ends with a chat in Kandrakar between the triumvirate. They worry about the challenge ahead, but the Oracle explicitly worries about the girls learning about Jonathan Ludmore. Will has a nightmare that evening where Cedric is in his snake form and Matt calls to her from a book before Cedric squashes it closed. The next morning, she's exhausted and depressed, of course. She ignores Susan's wedding planning chatter. That same day, Irma literally runs into Joel, who immediately begins asking her about Matt. Irma panics and says he's on a trip. We again see Matt in the book. He's getting aggressive at the presence watching him and seems a little loopy about the unknown passage of time. Arube is still mentoring Cedric, and he's got a devious smile on as he says he enjoys her company. She feels that he meant that sarcastically, and that makes him think to himself that he really needs to earn her trust back. She even expresses that she is trying not to make another mistake around him. She feels guilty that she talked to Cedric about Ludmore, and then this all happened. She feels used. He teases that she needs sleep, and they begin to banter back and forth. He says that he thinks she's worried about him. This causes her to disengage, and she gets up, to his dismay, and sits in the ornate chair. Cedric again thinks about regaining her trust, and offers her tea. She smiles and remarks that he is integrating well. This causes him to yell and call Earth an unbearable prison. Arube says she thought so once too, and he calls Earth an alien world. Arube reminds him that they are the aliens to Earth, and once he admits that, he won't feel alone. He bites back, saying he's fine being alone, just as the door dings. Arube tells him to go, looking upset. Clearly, she was saying something to Cedric that he didn't pick up on. He essentially just took her companionship proposal down, pushing her further away. As Cedric deals with the customer, he thinks to himself that he shouldn't lie to Arube, but instead give her half-truths. As he returns to the basement, he muses on his feelings for Arube. Something about Arube frightens him. He considers her intelligent, and he thinks of her eyes. The narration says he doesn't realize what his feelings mean. He finds that she has fallen asleep, and he thinks it makes her appear softer, sweeter, and creepily stated, vulnerable. And the Yen Press recent release actually says the word helpless. Meanwhile, the girls grill Irma for talking to Joel and saying Matt was on a trip. Taranee especially tears into her. Will goes to Cornelia's house, and Cornelia says they should craft an email in Matt's name to calm people down. They come up with a story that Matt is helping a friend they've made up named Steve move to the city Midgale, the same city the Astrodrops ran to in Arc 3. Again, Cornelia is a great manager. Will says it probably won't convince Matt's mom, who may come back from a business trip any day now. Cornelia says they'll cross that bridge when they get there. This fan translation left the screen blank, while Yen Press actually left the screen in Italian in my English translation, so it's just funny that Cornelia is typing in Italian. Cornelia tries to think what Matt's password would be. She puts Will's name in with success. This makes Will cry. She's upset that Matt, of all people, was taken. Everyone returns to the bookshop. The book has finally spoken, awakening Arube from her earlier slumber. Will immediately yells at Cedric to translate what it said. He starts to say he doesn't know, and Will immediately launches into an aggressive threat. Arube looks tired of this and steps in. He doesn't know what the book said because the book spoke in a riddle. The riddle goes as follows. The gleam in the liquid abyss lights up the voices of the enchantresses. Will touches the wall, her hand tracing the cracks. We see a small illuminated dot at the end of a crack in Heatherfield Bay. It's unclear if the girls see the map that we do that's serving as an overlay at this time. We see that the riddle has kept Will up all night. While leaving school, Cornelia runs into Peter. He was trying to catch Will and asks about Matt. She gets a ride home from Peter. He insists, and we learn Matt has some of Sheffield Institute's music equipment on loan that Peter needs to bring back. She asks to be dropped off at Hay Lin's, and they formulate a plan to steal the equipment from Matt's house and pretend Will has it, but forgot it because she's helping Susan and Dean plan their wedding. They wear their hair up in hats. Cornelia's hat says boys. The neighbor is essentially Gladys Kravitz from Bewitched. She points out the bizarre stuff that the girls barely try to hide. Cornelia makes a bush grow to climb it. They both try and fail to lift the equipment themselves, so they decide to float it out, again freaking out the neighbor. We also learn Hay Lin likes to say spells, even if it doesn't need to be done. Matt's mom happens to come home while they try to escape. The equipment isn't brought up again, so I assume they succeeded. During all of this, Will has gone wedding dress shopping with her mother and isn't paying attention. She repeats the riddle aloud to herself, and the shop clerk recognizes this as a quote from an author named Thomas Lowett. Will is now eager to visit Dean's house and hopefully learn more about Lowett. She earlier refused. She finds one of his books there and almost immediately asks Dean about him. She learns Lowett was a poet from the end of the 19th century, so around the late 1890s or so. Before he became famous, he was a keeper of a lighthouse on a place called Siren Island. The Enchantress's poem made people think it was a cursed island. Quick aside, siren is another word for mermaid, and there's tales of mermaids leading people to their dooms with songs or speaking to them. Keep that in mind. At the start of the 20th century, just about the 1900s, the lighthouse and island became submerged underwater in a major storm. The lighthouse that stands today is a totally different location. Will connects the lighthouse as the gleam in the liquid abyss. Will immediately skedaddles off to study, which means rushing off to Arube's. Will is excited. At Arube's, only Taranee, Irma, and Arube are present. They don't know what Cornelia and Hay Lin are up to right now. Will says that Siren Island no longer appears on maps, but the crack in the wall overlaps to point out a small rock formation, likely where the bay is, and that they will likely start off facing the element of water. I guess they weren't certain before about this book being the Book of the Elements, even though it came from Ludmore Manor, but they are certainly sure now. Irma, at least, repoints out that the book came from Ludmore Manor, so of course it's the Book of Elements. The next day, Susan beckons Will. Matt's mom is calling. She refuses to speak with her, which shocks Susan. She makes her talk anyway. Will is a deer in the headlights, but takes the phone and slams Susan out. Matt's mom is frantic and is hoping Will has answers. She doesn't know any Stevens, which was the guy from the cover story. Will can barely say anything. There are tears in her eyes. Matt's mom thinks that it's her own fault that Matt ran away because they had just had a fight before she left for her trip. By the way, Matt has a whole poster of a photo of him and Will, and she just has a Polaroid of this photo. Meaning tiny. Susan is now suspicious of Will. Apparently, Will told Susan she saw Matt the other day, when he was already missing at that point. Later that day, the girls are examining maps to help find the location of Siren Island in today's maps. Each girl looks at Will, amazed at her strength through this tough time. This panel makes me think that they all said that to each other without Will hearing it telepathically, but it could also mean that they have all further realized the direness of the situation and how differently, maybe even somehow wrongly, they each would have handled it. These looks are either of pity or somber realization. What do you think? Will springs up with a determination. It's a holiday weekend and they hope to find all the elemental stones before next week. Will gets frustrated though. They need to take a boat. Kids would not be allowed. Hay Lin reminds us they can transform on their own. Will thinks she means go invisible and transformed before Hay Lin and Cornelia declare shopping or crafting disguises. Irma seems eager to raid Arube's closet. Taranee suddenly introduces us to the possibility of magically creating clothes. Not sure when she learned that. Now they need a cover story. Irma remembers hanging out with Martin's Happy Bear Scout Troop. This is where she learns that the island remains just above water and has rare birds on it. She plans that they should disguise themselves as ornithologists, those who study birds. They manage to find a small boat with a captain that will take them there, but he takes time to say the island is cursed. Irma gets theatrical at this, and Hay Lin is seasick. The captain explains that Lo.I.T.C.H came to Siren Island after his heart was broken. Taranee asks him if he lived alone, and the captain says the island has always been deserted and unlivable, but Lo.I.T.C.H wrote about creatures with melodious voices that kept him company. Cornelia's wings burst out of her shirt, so we get to hear no more of this lore as they arrive in the mist. The weather changes from sunny to foggy and cold, and the captain says, while he isn't supernatural, it always gets foggy as you approach this island, and some people think the island is trying to hide something. They decide to split to cover more ground, and things get weird immediately. We see Matt and Will in parallel, both feeling hopeless. It's almost as if they're communicating, and he asks Will where she is. She says she's on her way and tells him not to be afraid. He says she's his only hope, and she looks badass as she now looks determined. Matt seems to shrink into his loneliness. It's not likely that they can hear each other, even though before we saw they could supposedly feel each other's presence. Taranee comes across a photographer, and she recognizes his face as the shop owner that got her into photography. But this isn't him. Taranee is amazed at the lush landscape and animals he's photographing when this island looked barren in the fog. He says people sometimes cannot see what's right in front of them. She continues to follow him and watch him work. We find Hay Lin enjoying the breeze when a horse suddenly leaps over her. A red-haired boy steps off the horse to apologize. Hay Lin recognizes that his face looks like Eric's, and this conversation they're having is word for word how they met. She even finishes his sentence for him. She wonders what this all means and asks him about Eric, and he's confused. She gets embarrassed. He introduces himself as Rudolph Lo.I.T.C.H, and Hay Lin recognizes his relation to the poet Thomas Lo.I.T.C.H. Rudy says he's a descendant of Thomas and that he has a family here with him. She knows she should report this to the others but doesn't, and keeps admiring his Eric-like appearance. Rudy's family lives off the land, and Hay Lin asks if they're lonely out here. Rudy replies by saying that so many people come to the island and never leave, that this place is full of freedom. Meanwhile, Will also finds a familiar face, a blonde guy that looks like Matt. He reminds me a lot of Howl. He's playing a flute, a song that Will recognized. The boy offers to play it again. It's his original material. Tears fill her eyes as the music surrounds them. She isn't sure if this guy is connected to Matt or if she's just desperate. She theorizes maybe it's Matt, but magic has changed him. He introduces himself as Anthony Lo.I.T.C.H, grandchild of the great poet. He expresses his love for the beauty of the isle. He asks what she thinks of the island, saying her name. She never told him her name. Waves burst up from the cliff behind him. Will cries tears of hope and runs towards him. She thinks this is Matt. She closes her eyes and leaps. He's gone, and she's headed toward the waves beneath the cliffside. Thankfully, Hay Lin arrives to catch her. Something similar happened with Rudy. She was about to take his hand when she snapped out of it and saw that she was about to injure her hand on some sharp rocks. Irma arrives and explains that she also escaped from an illusion. It all started when Irma smelled something delicious, the cake her birth mother used to make. Really quick, look at the home on the range style cows right there. That one seems to know what's up. Coincidentally, today would have been Irma's mother's birthday, and her father just talked about her that morning. Irma approaches a little cottage in a quaint forest. This sugary smell is the only thing Irma has regarding memories of her mother, besides photographs and stories. This cake is a snack baby Irma always asked for. She peers through the window, and there's something that surprises her about the chef. She sneaks to the door, and as she peeks, she falls in. The chef has long brown hair and is busily working. It's a woman that looks a lot like Irma. She says hello without turning around. Irma can't bring herself to say she isn't someone that she knows. As she pours milk, she realizes Irma is here and not her daughter Rose, but remarks that Irma seems familiar. Irma explains to Will and Hay Lin that she knew it was all an illusion when she only saw her face reflected in the tray and nothing on top. Irma feels guilty for not informing the others of what she found, and that it was as if the others didn't even exist. This is something a few of the girls express, actually. At that moment, Taranee arrives, rushing over with a photograph, shouting that something amazing has happened to her. They all express that they've seen visions, and Taranee thinks they know what she's seen. However, they haven't, and she has to explain. The photographer she'd been following disappeared from the photograph. The photo is now of just a cave. They suspect the stone is in there, right under their noses, once she saw past the illusion. They all realize Cornelia is still out there, facing her own illusion. Cornelia met a black-haired girl named Rose, the very same the chef asked for. This is Rose. She bears a striking resemblance to Elian. Rose asks Cornelia to help her pick flowers for her mother. All the while, Cornelia is stunned by the resemblance and trying to remind herself it's not Elian. Today is Rose's mother's birthday. Cornelia has a flashback of Elian. She's chasing Elian through the fields of heather, and Elian wants to declare their friendship to the whole world. They stand on a cliff at sunset, and Elian hoists her voice, saying,
"Cornelia's my best friend."
Cornelia remembers laying with Elian in the field, sharing secrets. She remembers that Elian took her hand and said something, but Rose interrupts that thought by saying, "Would you like to see the most beautiful place on the island?" It's unclear if that parallels what Elian said, as we don't see that part of the memory, and it's not likely what Elian would have said. Rose then asks Cornelia to pick a flower from a dangerous cliff below. Cornelia accepts without hesitation and doesn't further question the strangeness of this all, even though she notices it. This is when the group tries to contact her telepathically, but she can't hear them, and she starts to descend the cliffside. They mentally shout her name, but it comes out of Rose's mouth. Finally, they break through, saying it's all an illusion, just as she begins to fall. Thankfully, she uses a branch to save herself. Now, all together, they enter the cave from Taranee's photo. Cornelia notices they've gone below water level, and Irma begins to feel dizzy. Taranee feels cold. Irma needs to sit down, and Taranee offers to stay with her, as the others carry on. Irma immediately starts being aggressive, making comments about not being cool enough for Taranee to hang out with her, and references her time with the dance school. Irma is still hurt over something that occurred earlier. Taranee says this isn't the time, that she's behaving strangely. Irma moves to go on after the others. There's a split in the tunnel that they didn't communicate. They find that they can't telepathically communicate at this moment. Irma hears voices that Taranee doesn't. Irma is mad Taranee doesn't trust that they should follow the voices. Irma starts to look bogged down, and we see little pixie creatures made of water whispering in her ear. They can't see them, though. They tell her to go toward the light. Irma looks pained. She starts to freak out and yells to stay away from her as she starts running, before she blasts the cave wall with a geyser. The other girls can hear the blast. Cornelia advises that they be careful. Will is frantic. Taranee's clothes have been torn. Irma has been separated, and she feels guilty, and they realize she'd been being manipulated. Taranee feels immense pain in her shoulder and heads off to find the others. The water fairies are slowly breaking Irma down. They convince her to follow them, to head towards the light, which in reality is a dark tunnel. Cornelia heals Taranee, and Will ushers them to hurry. Hay Lin suggests that they let Irma face the water elemental alone. It might be what they need to do. Cornelia believes Irma is more vulnerable because she matches the element. They decide they should leave Irma behind while they face the elemental. Taranee fights against that plan. Suddenly, there is a rumble, and the water begins to flood the caverns. And someone forgot how to draw Taranee's tights. They quickly realize they can breathe and talk. The others quickly become distracted and start swimming around as though they are flying. Taranee is confused. She can't seem to get them to focus. Suddenly they see a light. It's emanating from an underwater lighthouse. Irma is calling them from the top. As the other girls don't question this and head toward her, Taranee feels the pain in her shoulder and realizes it's why she isn't distracted. Hearing their thoughts confirms that they are under a trance from the water fairies. Taranee engulfs herself in flames and tries to stop them. She tells Irma to get off the lighthouse. Only a moment passes, and she blasts the lighthouse. There's a loud squeal. The lighthouse is actually a creature. A tentacle remains wrapped around Irma's leg. Taranee is knocked out. Will blasts the creature, and thousands of eyeless piranha swarm. The voices again hound Irma. Irma realizes the return of the voices means the creature is again awakening. It grabs her, and things look hopeless. The creature likens Irma to itself, and she says she is nothing like the creature. She twists up and launches her fist into the creature's eye. Everyone's grossed out, but the piranhas aren't guided by the creature anymore. From the eye goop, Irma pulls the stone. When the creature's defeated, the water is no longer breathable. Cornelia, the weak swimmer, nearly drowns before she's pulled into Irma's air bubble. As they ascend, they spot the old, destroyed lighthouse of the island. Taranee regains consciousness as Irma tears up, looking out over the cliffside. Taranee and Irma apologize to each other. Back at the bookshop, Irma dotes on Taranee. Irma goes to put the stone in the book, and light envelops her. At first, it looks scary, but Irma looks to be in ecstasy, and a lock opens. Arube observes everyone. She marvels at the girl's ability to bounce back and stay light. She notices Cedric looks pleased and again worries about his motivations. Irma shares that she had a vision after returning the stone. She sensed another world where it began to rain. Islands and creatures started to populate that world. We, as readers, see Matt fall to his knees as water rains upon him. He feels reborn and shouts to the skies, calling out to Will. He proclaims his love. Arube tears up at what Irma has said and the sorrow of Matt and Will's being apart. When Taranee asks her if she's okay, she pretends to have dust in her eyes. She considers heading home to, quote, watch a relaxing action movie. She goes to check on Cedric first. He turns ominously. The book has spoken again. The riddle this time says, it pulsates in the jaws of the world, and it waits for you to fall between its sharp, fiery fangs. The next chapter begins with a fiery creature haunting Taranee's dreams. She hears a sort of heartbeat. The creature creates a lava doll of Taranee and brings it to her. As she touches it, she becomes enveloped in lava and starts screaming, waking herself up. That day at school, a pet spider gets loose and Taranee threatens to incinerate the poor pet owner. Irma catches it. Cornelia finds Irma, Taranee, and Hay Lin and tells them the map revealed the next location, at the spa Taranee landed at. That time they were strewn about leaving Kandrakar. Meanwhile, Will can't get a booking at the spa because it's too expensive. Cornelia heads home. Her sour grandmother is visiting. Cornelia is a little late, and she scolds Cornelia's mother, Liz, for not raising her better. Her grandmother goes on to say Cornelia needs to act more like a member of the Hale side of the family, and insults Elizabeth again. She says she needs training in sophistication, and invites her to warm water spa. How convenient, Cornelia shouts with joy. She invites the gang to go with them. The rest of the girls will need to take a bus, and Irma nearly gets run over trying to stop one. They're on strike. Will screams in frustration, and the tires pop. Hay Lin tells her to chill, and she does until there's a lot of honking and yells before realizing Taranee has shown up with Peter. She heard that the strike was going on and recruited Peter. Before this, the others thought she bailed on them and wouldn't be joining them. Will apologizes for thinking this, and Taranee apologizes for causing her friends to even think she'd choose dance over saving Matt. She takes Will's hands and affirms her place with them. They all decide to torture Peter during the car ride so he doesn't have time to talk about Matt. Poor guy. He drops them off and says hi to Cornelia. In her thoughts, the grandma calls Peter a hippie. In this fan translation, which is probably close to the original, she thinks he has outlandish hair. Cornelia introduces the girls to her grandmother. She's impressed that she's friends with a judge's daughter. However, Irma accidentally makes it sound like her father is a crime lord rather than an officer. She doesn't bother to hear anyone else's name and lineage. They get a fancy room and plan to scope out the spa at 9 p.m. when Cornelia's grandmother is asleep. For now, they go swimming, and we see Cornelia still needs swimming lessons and asks Irma to stay close. Taranee takes a nap in a fancy hot tub chair and has a nightmare. Will wakes her up as she's screaming. Taranee expresses worry, and Will brushes the dream off as nothing to worry about. As they head to the room, a staff member takes a liking to Hay Lin and gives her a tour. There's a change of plans when Cornelia's grandma wants to go to the spa at midnight for a scavenger hunt. Hay Lin suggests it's a good chance to snoop. Cornelia's grandmother is rude to Irma, telling her to get presentable, which makes her feel bad. At the scavenger hunt, Taranee feels dizzy. Hay Lin gets the boy from the staff to bring them to a spring called the Jaws of the World, thinking it's related to the riddle. Irma teases Hay Lin about the boy's attention, and Hay Lin yells at her to stop. The girls look warily into the vent shaft that they've been led to. Will looks happy, though. Taranee hears the same thunting sound she's been hearing in her dream. Soon, they're in caverns again. Hay Lin falls, but is transformed safely in time. The creature from Taranee's dreams easily takes her over, and she works to separate herself, obeying the creature's every word. Cornelia is the first to notice their telepathy isn't working. Taranee is the go-between. They rush back. The dream creature is a lava Chernobog, telling Taranee to return to her element. She happily enters the Chernobog's arms. Cornelia and Irma are no match. Will and Hay Lin return, and Hay Lin can't get Taranee out. This is like the nightmare Taranee expressed. Will feels guilty for not listening and falls to her knees. They all wallow in sorrow for a bit, and Will feels any decision isn't going to be a mistake. It's again Cornelia to pull her out of her funk. She first asks if she can make a suggestion. Will says only if it's brilliant. She suggests doing nothing means doom for sure, but trying to save her, even if it's risky, they have some small chance of success. Will thinks maybe isn't good enough, but they try anyway. Cornelia says they have no choice. They attack the Chernobog, now swathed in its stone wings. The creature says Taranee belongs with them, and makes her falter as she remembers earlier she told Will she knows exactly where she belongs. Only this time, it's Taranee and her guardian form holding hands. Taranee reaches into the flames, and they consume her. The girls are exhausted outside. Taranee emerges and destroys the Chernobog with the help of Irma and Cornelia. Taranee thinks she's stuck like that, but Hay Lin takes her hand and she reverts back. Yay, friendship. Back at the spa, we see Taranee grabbed the next stone. Irma has a water vision about the spa scavenger hunt and wins the prize. Cornelia's grandmother says she needs to talk about her choosing her friends, and Cornelia tells her they are the best friends that she could have. Taranee returns the stone. We don't see what it does to the book, but a lock opens. In Kandrakar, the transmuting cards have gotten violent, and the Oracle is just letting himself get cut. Yanlin and Andarno save him. He heals himself and says the elements are restless, and he can't communicate with them. He tells them that the sentient book is what's left of Jonathan Ludmore. Yanlin calls Ludmore the old alchemist. The Oracle tells Yanlin Ludmore is using the girls to escape the book, and they cannot interfere. The next stones are discovered very quickly. For context, it took 90 pages or so to find the water stone, 59 pages for the fire stone, and 47 pages for the earth and air stone, which are worked on simultaneously. It's almost like they got carried away and then realized they really needed to get going. In particular, that's 25 pages for earth and 22 pages for air in comparison. And as you can already tell, the adventures are getting less and less exciting. Cornelia, Irma, and Taranee go together to a canyon. There really doesn't seem to be a reason to find the stones at the same time, but here we are. And of course they can't communicate telepathically. The earth riddle was, they slip fast in the dark between cold fingers of stone. They happen to find a rock in a hand formation. Cornelia says the map pointed to this mountain. It doesn't seem to be the place where she fell when returning from Kandrakar. Meanwhile, Will and Hay Lin are disguised and headed to the top of the building that she was at before. A little boy can tell they have wings. Hay Lin pretends it's for a costume party. Either way, he tells them to be careful. It's stormy. The air riddle said, a place without sleep, where dreams cannot make you fly. The wind and rain are strong. They can only sometimes get messages to each other. Again, no one said they had to get these stones at the same time. In the canyon, the ground splits, and the girls fall down just as Will and Hay Lin are sucked up into the clouds. Irma is briefly knocked out. They're in a cavern with what looks like dead trees. Taranee has filled the room with firelights. Irma and Taranee are attracted to some kind of smell. For Irma, it's the sea. For Taranee, it's embers. Cornelia can't smell anything, though. In the sky, there are pillars of ice, and they can walk on the clouds. They are way above Heatherfield. Will sees a strange ice formation, and it begins shooting icicles at her. It turns out there's a large creature. Back underground, Irma and Taranee think they're seeing shadows that Cornelia can't see. Up above, Hay Lin spots her guardian stone's location. Will is suddenly sleepy and begins falling through the clouds. Unlike the other trials, Cornelia suspects the other girls are being manipulated and not herself. She's hiding from them right now. Cornelia notices everything around them, even the flowers, are made of stone. The stone flowers are radiating an essence Cornelia seems to be immune to. Essentially on their own, Cornelia and Hay Lin try to telepathically connect. It's difficult. In Kandrakar, Hay Lin urges an intervention, and Darno disagrees. The Oracle says they can at least clear up the weather, and Darno is annoyed. The girls can finally connect. Cornelia says that Hay Lin needs to clear the fumes in the cavern, and Cornelia needs to heal Will. She notes that the opposite elements were helpful on the water and fire mission. This seems to be no different. They suggest they swap through teleportation. It doesn't work. Will is now sinking. Hay Lin's hand glows pink, and suddenly she's healing the scrape from the icicle, and Will awakens. Cornelia is surrounded by flames. She moves to make a crack in the ground, and instead, she begins to lift off the ground. She immediately loses control and flies into a tree, and down onto the stone flowers. The stone flowers are in the shape of Cornelia's symbol. At the same time, Will blasts the creature so Hay Lin can sneak. Cornelia is about to pull the earth stone when Irma and Taranee try to stop her. She readies to use an air move against them, and regrettably, Cornelia does a kung fu pose and a hi-ya shriek to be like Hay Lin, she says. That aged very poorly. The Yen Press version actually says yahi-ya. Anywho, this sends out a huge gust as she stomps her foot. The girls are free from their trance. They grab the air stone and earth stone at the same time. The caverns begin to crumble, and the clouds in the sky lose their solidity. Cornelia still has Hay Lin's ability and flies their group out, while Will and Hay Lin plummet to Earth. For suspense, let's check in on Arube and Cedric. They're playing chess, and he wins. She gets frustrated, and he asks why. He knows she likes tactical games like this. She says she's bored, and Cedric seems a little miffed, saying he thought she grew to like his company. She then clarifies it's because she wished she was out helping the girls. She doesn't think the group should have split up, and Cedric calls Will impatient and mocks her bond with Matt. Arube yells at him. She says that here on Earth, emotions are strong and different than she's used to, and she's been feeling some new feelings lately. Cedric calls emotions an infection, and this angers Arube. She tells him that she knows he's been feeling differently as well. He internally denies it at first, but then he continues thinking. He admits to himself that he sometimes thinks about telling Arube his plans, that he would like to ask her to leave with him after he gets his powers, and then he realizes, can he really be feeling love for her? When we next see them, Cedric and Arube are having a huge laugh about Cornelia, Taranee, and Irma having flown into a thorn bush after leaving the cavern. Thankfully, Will and Hay Lin returned safely. Hay Lin's powers returned from Cornelia just as they were about to splat on the roof. Cornelia and Hay Lin briefly talk about the experience of having each other's powers before Will ushers them to put their stones back into the cover. Like the others, they get a good feeling as the locks open. All is quiet, and Will begins yelling at Cedric for information. He has none. But Arube notices a hole shaped like the heart has opened on the book cover. Will takes out the heart without even hesitating, but she feels its fear. The group thinks this is a bad idea. Before Will can make a choice, a dragon of red light wraps around her arm. Cornelia grabs Will as it pulls her towards the book, and in a bright flash, everyone is gone. The transmuting cards in Kandrakar seem to disappear as well, except for the one that has the image of the heart of Kandrakar. Back on Earth, we see Matt's mom filing a missing person report. Hay Lin approaches Himrish and says that her and Darno are worried that Ludmore was already really powerful and the girls might not make it. The Oracle says that Ludmore doesn't have everything he needs yet and that Kandrakar chose the girls wisely and they should trust it. He tells them that the cards have also disappeared. They must wait for the Guardians to return. Hay Lin says, if they return. Strange for her. We find Will and Hay Lin in a brick room. A small tag at the top reads Chapter 1. It's unclear if Will sees it too, but it looks like she's looking at that tag. Will pushes on the wall, and it opens up into an ornate green hallway. They recognize these walls from the Meridian Castle. They approach the all-too-familiar throne room. They recognize a voice speaking to Ludmore about Heatherfield being the perfect place for their plans. It's Phobos. They're discussing the creation of portals. Ludmore looks very old here, even though when Mr. Collins was telling his story, he looked much younger. Anyway, Will realizes they are actually in the past. The book must have been Ludmore's diary. Phobos hears their voices and sends a guard. They book it. Hay Lin realizes she can't use her powers. The transmuting cards appear, though, and create a trail that leads to an ornate door. The cards show an image of a pen before it flips to an image of a key. Hay Lin realizes that she must have to write the title of the second chapter to move on. In a frenzy, she writes Heatherfield, and it works. Now they are near Villa Ludmore in Heatherfield, and begin to suddenly fall off the cliff. Before they can save themselves, Taranee and Arube are there and save them. They head to the villa. Inside, there are candles, but some of these lamps look electric. They hear someone speaking. It's the exact moment that Ludmore invokes the elements and gets pulled into the book. A panel briefly focuses on a feather pen. Chaos ensues. The pen that Hay Lin brought falters when they try to write the next chapter, but Will gets it to work. She writes Matt as the next title. Now in chapter 3, they find themselves on an island. A pterodactyl takes Arube, but Cornelia and Irma show up and chuck rocks at it till it drops her. Then a T-Rex shows up and fights it. When it dies, the pterodactyl becomes ink. We hear Ludmore's thoughts that he almost got the heart of Kendrickar, but it stayed with Will, which is why everyone got pulled in. Somewhere, Cedric and Ludmore are speaking. Ludmore speaks to him disrespectfully, and Cedric still wishes him success. Cedric realizes Ludmore isn't all that powerful, and their fates are now equal. They are all trapped. Ludmore requests more of Cedric. Cedric asks why he should still be helping him, and he replies that Cedric has no choice in the matter. He tells Cedric to get the heart of Kendrickar. Cedric believes Will not give it up easily, but he still agrees to help if he gets his powers back. He does. Ludmore says he'll strike down anyone that tries to stop Cedric. The girls are following a trail of transmuting cards. Cornelia points out one before something like a shinobi from Naruto picks it up. Blasts of fire begin falling from the sky, and the girls are forced out into the open. Suddenly, they are met with Cedric in his snaky glory. Cedric now announces the revenge he's been working towards. Arube steps forward and challenges him to attack. He tells her to stay out of the way, that he can't hurt her, and she knows that. She tells him she didn't know his feelings for her, but hoped that they were there and hoped they would change his evil ways. He tells her he has changed because he's at least hesitating to attack her and trying to figure out how to convince her to join his side. She refuses and says he is on the wrong side. He blasts lightning beside her to scare her. The eye shows up, but Will says it's actually been watching them. She likely spotted it here. Cedric says that Ludmore will let them go free if they hand over the heart of Kendrickar. Will knows the heart will be nabbed if they transform, that she needs to negotiate, and asks to see Matt before handing over the heart. He tells her Matt is in the last chapter with Ludmore, and she's about to hand over the heart when Arube holds her back. Arube says that Ludmore must be weak if he sent Cedric, and to not hand over the heart, that they still have a chance. Cedric remembers that Ludmore will strike down anyone that stops Will. Arube flashes through his mind before he jumps in the way of a loading blast. He's struck point blank and falls to the ground in human form. They all scramble and help Cedric limp for cover. He pulls out the transmuting cards he stole so they may guide them. The cards lead them to a cave and another door, finished by the card representing the heart. Hay Lin's pen isn't working, but she reveals she took the feather pen that almost took her out in the previous chapter. But she doesn't have ink. Irma scolds her and they start to fight before Cornelia stops them and points out the desperate moment between Arube and Cedric. Arube is comforting him and says that Cornelia can heal him. She looks conflicted about it, but Cedric refuses the heal anyway. He says their powers are limited here and they should save it all for Ludmore. He laughs weakly. He says he'd fight them even now, despite their nauseating compassion. Cedric reminds them that when things die here, they become ink. Arube won't accept this, but Cedric says it will happen and that his end doesn't belong to any tyrant. He tears up as he tells Arube not to be sad, that this is his destiny, that she makes him think of the sunshine of Basiliad, and that he wishes her sunshine could warm him up right now. His hand falls from hers. He becomes swathed in light and turns into a black pool of ink. Arube refuses Will's consolation. She takes the feather pen from Hay Lin and uses Cedric's ink to write the next chapter title, Goodbye. Arube is sobbing when Will grabs her attention. They're now in a dark abyss. Will momentarily thinks they've gone blind. They hear a repetitive noise that she thinks is her heartbeat at first. They see a light and rush toward what Will now thinks is a gooey dripping sound. Everyone looks horrified. They find Matt in an hourglass, filling with ink. Will screams his name and beats the glass, but he can't hear as he continues to write, not noticing the ink climbing around him. Cornelia sees something and has to force Will to look. The ink in the chamber above Matt is forming shapes reminiscent of their story. Here, the day they met rescuing Dormouse. Except Will isn't there in any of these familiar memories. She collapses. Arube remembers some of Cedric's final words, that Ludmore cannot be trusted. This must be a trick, but she can't seem to speak. The other girls are silent. Will summons the heart. Ludmore appears behind Matt. He explains that Matt found him in a cave and collapsed. Ludmore gave him a position, the scribe of the book. He trusted him after feeling his presence follow him for so long. Ludmore claims Matt is now bound to the book and offers to set him free in exchange for the heart. Will aggressively pulls the heart to her hands and thrusts it toward him. Everyone else is shocked, and he clutches it in his hands. However, the heart lets out a beam that seems to hurt Ludmore and cracks the hourglass. Will says it's not her decision, but the heart's. Matt is free now and sees the struggle, running to give Ludmore a big punch in the face. Ludmore still lunges for the heart, but it rejects him. Everyone briefly celebrates before Ludmore becomes a monster. Matt blocks the attack, but is bested. Will says to leave him out of it, and he calls her a jealous girlfriend. Will tries to control her anger because the heart may abandon her, or so they believe in this moment. The others transform. Taranee is blasted and becomes the fire form she was during her stone's recovery. They all get beamed by Ludmore's eye and become one with their elements. Their powers are strengthened. They fuse abilities to make sandstorms, lava, and quicksand. Will reaches for Matt and pulls him to safety. Ludmore again grabs for the heart in her distraction. He's powered up and reabsorbs the girl's power. Matt eyes the book he was forced to write in earlier. As Ludmore is distracted, he writes something. He crosses off Ludmore's name at the beginning of the book, which erases the rest of the mentions of his name. Ludmore begins melting into ink. Matt writes that they will all awaken together in the bookshop. They evaporate the puddle of ink and send it on the wind. As they write, the end. Arube clasps the book remorsefully. The transmuting cards arrive, and they ride them like magic carpets to Kandrakar, Matt with them. The Oracle welcomes Matt as the first guest of Kandrakar. They all bow in gratitude. He says that this was the most important mission in Kandrakar's history. Matt looks shell-shocked as the Oracle says there is strength more powerful than magic, and Matt showed that today. Irma cringes as the triumvirate says thank you. And Yanlin does not look like herself at all here. They say they will throw a celebration and gift the group rings on necklaces. Back home, Arube goes back to the bookshop, and Matt returns to a tearful mother and unquestioning friends. But he does seem to feel some pressure now. We see the Oracle and Yanlin giddily preparing for a celebration for the Guardians. Arube, on the other hand, appears sad as she looks at her ring. Wee is at her side. She thinks about how she misses the girls, implying that she hasn't seen them in some time. She confides in Wee that she can't see herself being in Heatherfield anymore. The Oracle overhears this and tells her she can return to Heatherfield whenever she wishes. Arube expresses to the Oracle that she feels confused and truly wanted to stay in Heatherfield, but felt terrified to stay at the same time. Personally, I think it's because Cedric. She'd be unhappy without him. The idea of seeing that bookshop empty would probably really hurt. We don't know what she did earlier when she went to the bookshop, by the way. She says that she wants to meditate on her future. She sadly flips through Ludmore's book. Wee gives her a kiss, and the Oracle leaves her be. She looks at the calm waters and envisions Cedric, How it's funny that meeting another foreigner to Earth made her feel less strange. She leans in to kiss the water. Her tears distort the image. She laments that love lost hurts more than physical pain, and that there is no future for her in Heatherfield without Cedric. She clutches the book and daydreams. The main story sums up by repeating that Kandrakar is meant to keep balance in a universe that's split into those who want peace and those who are evil. That the Guardians are a roll over 1,000 years old, an eternal establishment. We fade out from Kandrakar and zoom in on the bookshop, where some kind of portal appears to open. As you remember, Susan and Dean are getting married. While Matt is trapped in the book, Will is not very focused or helpful to her mother's wedding planning. Susan thinks it's because Will doesn't really like Dean, but also thinks she's projecting her own fears, as we have seen her do that before. At least she's aware now. For example, Will wants her to reschedule appointments and doesn't want to go to Dean's. She also is absent-minded at the dress shop, but once Will knows Dean might help her solve the riddle, she suddenly wants to go over. Susan considers this a mood swing, not knowing the true motive. Susan and Dean have a brief skirmish about bringing all his books to the apartment. They make up quickly in the background. Even though Susan doesn't know what's going on, she still manages to give Will hopeful motivation that reaches Will in her time of need. There is some weird attempt at drama where Cornelia thinks Dean has a thing for a female teaching friend of his that is part of the wedding. This is only a scene of this, and it goes nowhere. The girls have a laugh that Knickerbocker is having dancing lessons, and the day of the wedding, Will accidentally startles Susan and she drops a ring down the sink. Susan panics, and Will says she'll figure it out. She ends up using her gifted ring from Kandrakar. The wedding is beautiful, and Will is the ring bearer. They notice that the ring is different, but the wedding carries on. I'm so happy for Susan. We see Irma continue to have conflicted feelings about Martin as she scoffs at him with the exchange student. She spots Joel and makes a loud show about running over to him. She falls into his arms and hopes Martin saw. He didn't, though. Her and Joel exchange flirtatious banter. This is the point in the arc where she gave Joel a story about Matt without consulting the group, and that makes them mad. But she also ruffles Taranee's feathers here. We'll discuss that in a minute. And the group gives her more heat. It causes her to storm off when Cornelia chimes in. Sometime later, Irma fails a test while Taranee passes. Taranee offers to study with her, and Irma jokes that Taranee just wants to show Irma that she's stupid. Irma feels silly for saying that, and Taranee is uncomfortable. Irma apologizes. They make plans to study after school, but then Sheila runs into the classroom telling Taranee there's going to be a popular band at the dance school. Taranee remembers her plans with Irma and cancels. Irma isn't happy, but she's such a fan of music you think it wouldn't bug her. She seems more jealous of Sheila and Taranee's friendship in this instance. This is the basis for their beef during the arc. Cutting back to Martin, Irma seems to blush when reflecting on a time when she hung out with his scout troop. It's unclear if this was the time when the witch girls split up fighting in an earlier arc, or if she began regular attendance of this group. She also has a dream at one point where Joel and Martin are asking her to choose them. She ends up choosing a donut in the dream, but it ends up eating her. When they are after the Earthstone, she is unconscious and speaking in her haze, asking someone if they packed the kids' lunch. We don't know who it was in this case. Let's go back to Irma ruffling Taranee's feathers. Like the rest of the group, Taranee isn't happy that Irma made up where Matt was without discussion first. Irma lashes back by randomly bringing up her friendship with Sheila and saying she has no time for them. Mind you, this takes place before Taranee chooses not to study with Irma, calling Sheila a viper. This causes Taranee to yell at her, saying she doesn't even know Sheila, and storms off with tears in her eyes. After she leaves, the girls tell Irma she should go easy on Taranee. Nigel is constantly calling to see her and is jealous of her new friends. Irma defends herself by saying they all have their own problems. When Cornelia and Hay Lin go to rob Matt's house, Cornelia rolls her eyes that Taranee couldn't help because she's practically living at the dance academy. None of the other girls were available at this time either, mind you. At one point, Peter answers the house phone, and it's Nigel. Peter is shocked that Taranee doesn't want to speak to him, and is annoyed he needs to make an excuse to hang up. He comes back to chat about it. Taranee expresses that she doesn't mesh with Nigel anymore, and that her life is going a different direction. She expresses that Nigel wants all of her time, and she has dreams and goals that require her attention. Regrettably, Peter immediately says she's neglecting Nigel. Taranee reaffirms she doesn't feel the same way as she used to about Nigel. In my opinion, Peter overreacts here. He brings up the fact that Nigel left his brother behind for her. What he's really doing is blaming the victim of a victim. Nigel left his abusive brother, which is good, but he wasn't healed, and he simply began his own obsessing and possessiveness. And then Peter storms out, and that's very uncharacteristic of Peter. However, we do get to see Taranee's diary, where Luke's name fills the page. Yes, Taranee needs to officially break up with Nigel. That is the extent of her wrong. Hay Lin's section is short. She sends Eric an email that she can't visit him during the holiday weekend. Of course, she can't tell him where they're going, because it's on a quest to find magical stones. But the story she gives Eric sounds like the excuse that it is, and he can tell it's an excuse. That's all we see. As for Cornelia, there's really nothing that goes on much for her at this point. She just gets a couple car rides with Peter, and there's really nothing more than just blushing to really talk about. This arc is when the Witch series reached issue number 50, which was a big celebration for them. They actually had a side magazine come out called Welcome Magazine, and it was sold with the 50th issue and a copy of that magazine. I do have both, and in the 50th issue, they feature artwork from some of the artists that have worked on Witch up to that point. Those artworks are featured in the 50th issue, but they also come in the Yen Press version of chapter book number 16. So you can find those at the back. And also, as you've just seen, they also have a Draw Will section. And they've also put Irma. So, as we know, Yen Press started out with some of these special things at the end and kind of stopped doing them. But here is some of the artwork featured, and I'm going to reel those across the screen. The other books in the Yen Press series include specials such as exploring information about Matt's room, 2 pages worth, Peter's room, there's his full image, Hay Lin's attic, and Irma's bathroom. Okay, so my final thoughts on this arc. It was a lot of build-up for very little payoff. As you can see in the first part of Arc 5, it's mostly just building up to the big moment of Matt getting taken into the book. There's a lot of life development from the girls, which is nice, but in my opinion, a really good witch arc blends those aspects nicely, where they can live their lives and also have their adventures at the same time instead of just focusing all on one or the other. I feel like that sort of keeps things interesting. As I mentioned during my review, they spent all that time looking for the water stone and then had to end up rushing through the rest of them. I like what they did with the water stone and kind of wish that they kept some sort of similar elements throughout the search for the rest of them. Ludmore's backstory and everything was a little bit confusing to me, because it seems like they're discussing some dark version of the elements, but don't really go into any more details than that. Are the girls now absorbing a dark side of their element, and would there be consequences from that? Or was that just flavor text? Even when they got into the book, it was very rushed, and they were going from chapter to chapter in a matter of a page. And when they finally get to where they find Matt and there's dinosaurs, that just feels so disjointed and weird. And I don't know if Matt brought the dinosaurs to the world, because maybe he was into dinosaurs. I feel like Ludmore could have been a bigger threat, and there could have been more lore built around this. But somehow this arc fell flat at the end and did not stick the landing. It is a nice mysterious lead off at the end where a strange portal opens up, so I'm excited to see where that goes. I mean, I already know a little bit. I read at least the Yen Press book 17, but I don't remember much of it. I was flipping through it last night and I only remember the first 2 chapters. I remember some details, which I'll save for my Arc 6 video. Now we're reaching territory that I have not yet read. So when I get to the point that I know I've read everything, I'm just going to try to make some kind of inference about where it's going, and we'll see what happens. So that's kind of exciting. Addressing also the Witch reboot, details and pages have been coming out. I'm going to try to save most of my initial reflections and reactions for later when the book comes out. And there will be a video reflecting on it, and there will be likely some special guests. I'm going to try to get some special videos out before Arc 6, which include a couple more witchcrafts and possibly playing some of the video games and reviewing the audio books. We'll see how that shakes out. See you next time.